So at this point, I'd like to introduce my panel. On my immediate left, so we have Emmanuel Atamba, who's a youth ambassador from Route to Food. And next to him is Dr. Timothy Njagi, who's a research fellow at the Tegemeo Institute of Agricultural Policy. Now, Tegemeo Institute is an institute of the Egerton University, and it has done a lot of research into the cost of maize production and exactly how much it costs to produce maize in the different parts of the country for both small-scale and large-scale farmers. So, Dr. Njagi, I'd like to start with you. I'd like to pick up something that Lois has said. Yep. She said that the farmers in North Rift say that it costs between 2,600 and close to 3,000 shillings to produce one bag of maize. You have done research on this. Do you agree with those numbers?
I think, just to explain the statistics, we have different farmers. We have farmers who are efficient and farmers who are not efficient. Clearly, when a farmer says that they're producing 2,000 or 3,000 shillings to produce a 90 kg bag, one of the things that we need to look at is we need to look at the farming system to look at how much that farmer is yielding, what are the yields for that particular farmer, so that at the end of the day, if this farmer is using optimum inputs, again, he should be getting optimum outputs. So if a farmer claims to have used 3,000, we will not dispute that because it's actually possible. The key thing is to establish what inputs is this farmer using and why is he not attaining the maximum output. But if you look at the current study that we did this year, we found that majority, and again, this is majority of the farmers in the maize basket regions, the cost of production, it was between 1,700 to 1,900 Kenya shillings per bag. And just again to clarify that this is the cost of production. So it doesn't include the cost of marketing, it doesn't include the profits and the margins that a farmer makes. So we just look at how much do you put in and compare with what you get at the end of the harvest. But then of course we know that 3,000 probably maybe a farmer is also including his profits and also the marketing cost.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And if you look at those numbers then, this you said 1,700 to 1,900, yeah. That number in between there. Yeah. Would you then therefore say that the government is justified to say that they'll be buying the maize at 2,300 shillings?
So that's, maybe let me put that into context. If you look at the last 5 to 6 years, the government has always been announcing a price that is higher than the market price when they're purchasing maize for the SFR. And the premium has always been big because we've been talking about an average of between 800 to 1,200 shillings. This price has always been almost like a negotiated price. So first, I would just to say that farmers are not irrational when they're asking for a higher price. The government has been doing this for them. So the key thing is, why is this year different? Why is this year that the government wants to stick to the cost of production, where in the previous years, the government has been putting a margin, they've been putting rebates, and farmers tend to know that the government will always announce a price that is very high compared to the market price. Yes. The second thing is that the effect of that price has always led to pushing up the private sector market prices. So, for example, if you compare to last year, before the government announced the price, a bag of maize was retailing of about, the wholesale price for an 90 kg bag was about 2,000 shillings. And immediately the government announced a price of 3,200. It had an effect of raising the private sector market to about 2,800. Yes. So farmers also understand that in fact, majority of the farmers never get to sell to NCPB. But there's always been this effect that pushes the private sector markets up that also makes farmers benefit. So even if they're selling to millers, they'll be selling at probably better prices compared to just the normal market price.
Before. Yeah. Yes, Emmanuel, you're a youth ambassador for this whole food conversation. Do you agree with the statement that Kenya is food insecure?
Thank you very much. First of all, the Route to Food Initiative is an alliance for people, individuals who are championing for attainment of the human right to food in Kenya, which is stipulated in our constitution, Article 43(1)(c), that every person has a right to adequate and sufficient food of good quality. And when we are talking about food security, it's a very broad concept that people need to understand. Food security is beyond what we have in the store now. As my colleague has talked about the system, when farmers are quoting higher prices than what are actually international standards, the prices in the international market, we should really question the system that we are using. Kenya has been at the forefront, leading many other African countries in adoption of green revolution, yes. which embodies monocultures, heavy use of chemical fertilizers, and we know that these kind of production methods are expensive. And at the end of the day, this now is what determines the price that these farmers are willing to sell their produce at. Yes. And so, to me, what I'm looking at is that we should be able to open our eyes and learn from the maize scenario. It happened with the sugar farmers, and people told them to uproot their sugar and plant maize. And now it's happening to maize farmers. And we even have leaders saying that these maize farmers should shift from maize farming to something that is more profitable. Yes. And I would say that maize farming is not, we cannot say that maize farming is not profitable. So it's something that is a discussion that we need to look at our system, we need to look at our food markets, and to be fair to smallholders. Smallholders produce 80% of the food that we consume. Yes. So we need to be really keen on that and pay attention to the challenges that smallholders are facing in our quest to ensure that we are food secure.
Yes. Now, remember, this conversation is not just happening here at the Nairobi studio. We also have this conversation happening at our Eldoret studio with Lois Wangoi. And also in our regional reporters are also chipping into this conversation. We have Martin Maura in Murang'a County, and we have Bernard Ojwang in the county of Migori. But right now, we'd just like to go to Murang'a County and hear some more from Martin. Martin?
Good morning again from Murang'a County. Now we're coming live from Murang'a CBD area, where we'll be talking to residents about maize farming, more so, but in relation to ugali. As you know, Central Kenya is known for githeri. So matters to do with maize, it touches on them. Now I'll be talking to some few guests to tell me their views about what they think about ugali. Karibu, Karibia. Now, briefly, maybe start by telling me your name and maybe how frequently you consume ugali.
Well, I'm Tony Muturi Ng'ang'a, na mimi ni mkazi wa hapa. I take ugali like 3 to 4 times per week, since it's my best food. Yep. It's my favorite meal, it's my best food, so I take it like 3 to 4 times per week. Yep.
Now, are there plans by the government to start controlling the maize prices? Do you think that is going to affect the plate of ugali in your house? And maybe would you like the government to interfere with maybe the prices?
Well, it's obvious that when they interfere with the maize prices, obvious consumption itaenda chini. Or we shall tutangalia like other means, like taking the maize and taking them to the posho mills, and we'll be taking them from there. Lakini so the plans to hike the prices, I don't think this affects the common mwananchi sana. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let us talk to another resident to tell us maybe his views about ugali, which is actually the first staple food, undeniably the staple food in the country, followed by wheat and rice. Karibu sana. Enjoy, karibu. Nataka unianzie na majina yako, uniambie wewe mambo ya ugali unaiona vipi kukulwa sana katika nchi ya Kenya? Angalia kwa mbele. Nitakushikia.
Okay. Ugali ni chakula ambayo ni muhimu sana kwa majina ni Philip Wafula Manyasi. Na naona ugali ni chakula muhimu sana kwa Kenya, kwa nchi yetu ya Kenya. Juu ugali unaweza kula mchana kutwa. Ukikula dema asubuhi unaweza shinda hivyo the whole day. Lakini ukisema ukule chakula kama mchele, madaka kidogo unasikia njaa, lakini ugali ukikula kwanza hasa upate na samaki ama mreda, uko sawa kabisa.
Sasa wewe, serikali iko na mpango wa kuanza kuingilia mambo ya mahindi, kuweka bei katika uuzaji wa mahindi. Unafikiria hiyo mahindi ita affect anyway ulaji wako wa ugali ama mwananchi wengine wa kawaida?
Ndio, hiyo ina affect juu kuna wananchi wengine wajiwezi wananua kitu ile siku walio tunaitwa gorogoro. Juu wakipandisha hiyo gorogoro, mwananchi wa kawaida hataweza kula mchele. Dema kula mchele ataona ni kama si tumezoea jembe.
Na sasa maybe wewe kwa wiki unakulaga ugali mara ngapi?
Mimi tuseme ugali nakula daily juu hiyo ndio ugali hiyo nimezoea. Chakula yenye nimezoea na nimelelewa na tangu utotoni.
Asante sana, nashukuru bwana Wafula.
Okay,
asante kwa muda wako.
Okay.
Now, those are just some of the views. As you have said and as you have heard, many people prefer taking ugali, which is actually very easy to prepare and cheaper in price. Back to you, studio.
Well, Martin, very interesting views you have there with Manyasa, and we'll get back there in a moment to touch a little bit more on what Manyasa has said. But right now, we'd like to cross over to the county of Migori and listen from Bernard. Bernard.
What's up? Thank you very much, Smriti. We are here in Homa Bay town. Remember, once you hear the word ugali, the only thing that will come back to your mind is the western region. But here it is something that many people can't do without, and we'll be interacting with locals here in Homa Bay town just to tell us why do they prefer ugali over other products like potatoes and other things. And remember, one of the fish here in Homa Bay County is one of the delicacy that can't be you can't do without ugali while taking fish. And now we're just going to talk to some people here. Just tell us. You'll start with their name. Utangalia kamera pale. Why do you prefer ugali?
Kenyatta. I'm in Homa Bay. I will like to request the government to reduce the price of maize, so that because maize is energy-giving food, most of people like eating ugali in Homa Bay. So I'm not very delighted with the issue of increasing the price of maize in Homa Bay. People of Homa Bay are not very delighted with it. Ugali is energy-giving food. If you eat ugali, you can be very strong. You can, yes.
Do you think the government should do something in the Songapa?
No, I stay in Homa Bay, but it is something very fantastic.
Well, thank you very much. I'll speak to another person here. Why do you prefer ugali?
First, my name is Jack Odongo. I'm from Homa Bay. The reason why I prefer ugali because ugali is an energy-giving food, and people of Homa Bay, they are Juakali people. So, for one to be energetic, he must eat ugali and fish. And to my request to the government, I think the government should reduce the prices of packets of maize flour, so that the people of around this area, they can afford it. Yeah.
But we have potatoes. Can you do with potatoes?
No. Potato is just a sweet food, but it's not an energy-giving food. Yeah.
Do you think the government should look at the prices of maize here in the country?
Yeah, of course they should, so that the people should afford the prices of with flour. Yeah.
Well, I think when I speak to another person here, you'll start with their name. Why do you prefer ugali?
Kwa majina naitwa Pinto Dhiambo Uta. Mimi ni mkaaji wa hapa Homa Bay. Jambo la kwanza, hamasisho langu ni kuwa serikali waangalie bei ya mahindi ishukishwe chini, sababu mwananchi wa chini wa kawaida wengi wao wanafanya jua kali, na jua kali kama kazi ya mjengo ama kukoroga unatumia nguvu nyingi. Ukitumia nguvu nyingi, chakula ile unaweza kula vizuri ni hiyo ugali au sima kwa lugha nyingine, na hiyo sima ndio indipatia nguvu nyingi kwa hawa vijana wetu, hawa ndugu zetu wanaofanya kazi ngumu. Sasa kama bei ya unga ama bei ya hiyo mahindi ikipanda juu, sisi tutaelekea wapi? Serikali mpaka wahamasishwe washukishe bei ya unga chini, kuanzia mahindi mpaka unga, ili mwananchi wa kawaida hata kinyenda katika supermarket kwenda kufanya shopping yake, aweze kupata bei nafuu ya kujisaidia ye mwenyewe na familia yake.
Je, unaona serikali inaweza fanya vyema, inastahili kuangalie bei ya mahindi?
Serikali iko na uwezo. Kuna madoadoa wale wako juu katika ngazi za juu katika serikali, wanaiba baadaye wanaficha mahindi, alafu baada ya hapo wanapandisha bei juu, ambapo anayeumia ni mwananchi wa chini wa kawaida, ambapo serikali mpaka waangalie mwananchi wa kawaida wa jua kali, kwa mfano kama watu wa bodaboda, watu wa mjengo, watu wa kuchomelea jua kali, mpaka waangaliwe ili tusaidiane katika maisha.
Asante sana.
Jambo la pili tena, hamasisha katika mashamba yetu, mazao yako, mashamba yanazaa vizuri, yanatoa mazao, lakini sasa jambo moja kubwa ni kuwa ni ile corruption ndio mbaya katika Kenya yetu sasa hizi. Asanteni sana, nashukuru, Mungu awabariki. Swali lingine uko nayo?
Asante sana. You've just heard from Homa Bay County residents. They are saying that most of them here are bodaboda operators, and some of them are in the Juakali sector, and they can't do with ugali. They can't do without ugali, since it is one of the energy that gives them energy. And they are now appealing to the government at least to relook at the prices of maize here in the country, and also the prices of one packet of unga, so that at least to make them at least afford, at least do with ugali each and every time. Back to you.
Interesting conversation there you're having, Bernard. I like some of the things that your guys there said, that ugali viazi haiwezi, haitoshi mboga kwa sababu ni maji. My panel here in studio was actually reacting to some of those comments, and when we come back here in studio, they will give us a little bit more of what they think about what Kenyans have said. But right now we're going to cross over to the county of Nakuru, where Bridget Ngana also is having the same conversation. Bridget.
Well, the maize conversation is still going on across the country, and here in Nakuru, we are going to speak with residents on what really is the liking, or what really makes Kenyans not divorce themselves from over-reliance on maize. And we're going to be speaking to some of them on the streets of Nakuru, and I'm being joined on set by one of them. Karibu sana, our NTV. Tunataka utueleze kwa nini Wakenya wanapenda ugali sana, ama wanategemea mahindi sana kiasi kwamba bei ikipanda ama inaleta shida nyingi sana.
Wakenya huwa tunapenda ugali sana, sababu hiyo ndio chakula tuliolelewa nayo. Sio kupenda, bali ni kupata, tulipata na ikabidi ya kwamba lazima tupate kuizoea. Na pia zaidi, ugali una nguvu, sababu wakati uko na nguvu unaweza fanya hata kazi iliyo mingi tena zaidi. Hata pia zaidi ya yote, ugali hiyo ndio chakula yenye sisi kama venye tumefika hivi tumepata kuizoea. Hata zaidi imekuwa msaada zaidi katika familia zetu, hata pia ni biashara. Sababu hata saizi ukijaribu kuangalia hata mambo na mahindi ni kwamba wakati inaguzwa kidogo unaona sisi wote tunalalamika.
Kwa nini? Mbona mwezi tegemea pengine mihogo ama viazi vitamu kama njia pia ya kupata zile nguvu zenye zinatokana na ugali?
Ni sababu, okay, the reason as to why sisi wenyewe unaona hatuwezi tegemea labda mihogo ama viazi tamu. Hii vitu kama hizo, okay, wacha niongee kwa upande wangu. I'm from Kisii. Surely hiyo ni chakula kama viazi muhogo unaendelea kutumia ukiwa unangoja kitu kama ugali. Hiyo ni a breakfast. It's not something yenye unatumia from there ati sasa hiyo ndio utakaa nao the whole day. Ugali ni chakula yenye ukikula unakaa mpaka the following day. Yeah.
So unataka kumaanisha pia kila asubuhi unatumia ugali badala ya baby mkate ama vitu vingine?
Situmii ugali asubuhi, bali nimesema ya kwamba viazi tamu, muhogo unatumia asubuhi as for breakfast. Lakini ugali unatumia zaidi katika lunch, sababu ya kazi zile sisi wa Kenya tunafanya zenye ni ngumu zaidi, kama kazi ya ukulima, kazi ya mjengo na zinginezo.
Okay.
Yeah, mtu kama mimi siwezi tumia viazi ama muhogo, ni ngumu sana.
Na ungependekeza pengine kama ingekuwa njia nyingine ya kubadilisha mtazamo ya kuhusu mahindi, tungefanya nini kama wananchi ama serikali ingefanya nini? Kwa sababu shida ni kila wakati bei inaongezeka, watu wanalalamika, na vyakula vingine hatujaona serikali ikililiwa vile mahindi inaliliwa.
Mahindi inaliliwa sababu ukijaribu kuangalia ni tegemeo zaidi la nchi yetu ya Kenya. Ukiangalia hasa wenzetu from the other side of Great Rift, hao watu wanalima mahindi yenye ni mingi zaidi, yenye wanaotegemea zaidi, hasa zaidi katika mambo na school fees na pia kujikuza katika maisha yao. Kwa hivyo wakati inaguzwa ni kama kuguza maisha ya mtu. Kwa hivyo hata wao hilo ndilo hapo ndiko wanapopata pato lao. Kwa hivyo ni kama hata mtu wakati unaambiwa kwamba uvutwe kazi, hata wao watakubali, lazima jitetee. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are very passionate sentiments. Asante sana. And we still are keeping this conversation ongoing. And I'm just going to move on to the next person. Thank you so much. Join us. You're joining us on NTV Live right now. Just tell us, why are Kenyans so stuck on maize as a staple food? Why can they move on to other things?
I think it is an issue of culture, because from the early upbringing, they usually brought up taking ugali as the staple food. Now, because of lack of exposure and maybe information, they cannot, I think they have a mindset that ugali is food. In fact, in some community, if you don't take ugali for supper, you have slept hungry, you didn't eat. So they want to make ugali, is like a small food god that they have. Looking at nearby countries like Uganda, they will take bananas and they are good to go. They don't rely so much on ugali. Other communities like the central, sometimes they try to balance, but some communities are stuck on ugali.
So what do you think is the best way forward in terms of us adapting other forms of carbohydrates or starch foods? Because at the end of the day, even if I eat potatoes, I'm still consuming the same starch that I would take if I was eating ugali.
I think what the Ministry of Agriculture and other line ministries need to do is to inform Kenyans that our target is getting carbohydrates. And the means justifies the end. As long as you're taking carbohydrate, be it cassava, be it rice, be it whatever carbohydrates you're taking, you're still going to be healthy. Now, if you're taking uji for your breakfast, still carbohydrates, and then for lunch you're taking ugali, and then supper you're taking ugali, there's still an issue of malnutrition. There's no balance. Yeah. So I think it is an issue of informing Kenyans and educating Kenyans that we can use the alternatives instead of relying on one. Now, using ugali so much or maize so much makes it a monopoly. It's kind of a monopoly food in the country. Yeah. So when we don't have ugali, it looks like we have a crisis. Yet our country, yet our country can grow other crops. Like in Western Kenya, cassava can do very well, potatoes, all those other carbohydrates, they can do very well. Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Varied sentiments regarding the issue of maize. There are some who feel that this is something that should never be divorced from the culture of Kenya as much as food is concerned. And there are those who feel like there's misinformation, so the government is being tasked with ensuring that there is enough information in terms of nutrition, because according to my last speaker, he was saying that even if you consume uji in the morning and have ugali for lunch and supper, that still means that you're still feeding on the same nutrients, and which would rather lead to malnutrition. But we are still following up on this conversation from the streets of Nakuru. I'll now take you back to studio where the main conversation is taking place.
But now, just coming back to our discussion, you've heard the comments that Kenyans have said out there, and actually some comments are coming in on Twitter. And at JC Kenya says that the maize drama in KE is brought about by the GOK. First, the government says that they want to reduce the cost of maize or cost of living, but then they always buy it at above market rates. This in turn increases the cost of unga and creates an artificial shortage. Just quick reactions to what you've had Kenyans say out there. Emmanuel, what do you think about what Kenyans have said?
Yeah, I think what I can pick from this discussion, because the journalists have been picking on consumers. We haven't heard from the farmer yet, but you can really hear consumers saying something very different from what the farmers are saying.
Yes.
The farmers are saying that they need better prices for their maize, and consumers are saying they need lower prices for maize. And if you look at the proposal that the government has made to buy maize at 2,300 shillings, brings a kilo of maize that they are going to buy at about 25 or 26 shillings. And when you look at the price that maize flour is retailed in our shops, it's about 50 shillings a kilo. And it has remained there. Recently, the government tried to say that you know, the millers should sell it at 70 shillings, but they refused.
Failed, yes.
Why is the government not able to regulate the price of maize in the market? And this is the question you need to ask: what is the responsibility of the government in this? Should the government be involved in business, or should the government just create an enabling environment to ensure that people are able to thrive, farmers are able to thrive, and then consumers are also able to access food at the prices that they feel comfortable at?
Dr. Njagi, starting with the first person that we had from Manyasa, from Murang'a County. Manyasa said, kama hajakula ugali hajakula. And that's the feeling that a lot of Kenyans will tell you. And actually parts of Kenya, like Western Kenya, and they will tell you if they've not eaten ugali, they have not, they've not eaten anything. And one of the reactions here in studio was that telling people to eat potatoes is like telling them to drink a lot of water, because potato is just water. What are your reactions to what Manyasa said?
So I think those are valid comments and opinions, and I think one of the things that we've been saying as a country, there is need to validate the information on how much we consume. I think there are a lot of numbers that are being thrown around in terms of per capita maize consumption, but there's actually need to validate that. What we've seen also is that, as the reporter mentioned, if you look at the consumption of especially rice, has grown exponentially over the last 10 years. So ideally, even though we know that our population is growing, I don't believe people are taking ugali and rice in the same meal. Probably what we'll be seeing is that, especially in urban areas, you'll be seeing a lot of substitution. So there is actually need to verify where that demand is and what people are consuming in which areas. Picking back from what my colleague mentioned, I think just again to stress that the government has a dual role. When you talk about food security, what the Constitution guarantees is both availability and accessibility. So that means that producers should be able to be profitable, and consumers should be able to find that that food is affordable. The challenge we have right now is the way the government intervenes. Yes, we cannot do without government intervention because maize is a staple food. But the way we do it, we end up creating distortions, and then instead of creating solutions, we end up creating more problems. That's where a sober discussion needs to be held. How should the government intervene? If today the government announces, or for example, gives in to the pressure from the farmers, then we are almost sure that the following day we are going to be having people in the streets because they cannot afford that, the price of unga at that price. So in terms of balancing, again, going back to where we started, we need to look at what should the government be doing for both ends. For producers, if the government wants to intervene for producers, then we need to look at what are these costs, where is the farmer, or what interventions can be done for the farmer to help bring his cost of production.
Interventions such as subsidies?
Exactly. So clearly we know that the current fertilizer subsidy program, for example, is not effective. We end up, and this is what, for example, we see in our study this year, that farmers who accessed subsidized fertilizer, of course, had some benefit. They had up to around 11% lower cost of production per bag of maize.
Yes.
But the problem is that fertilizer only accounts for about 16% of the cost of production. You have other issues that are emerging, like land rent. If you look at the last 5 years, the land rent has been increasing year on year. So what is informing that? Yet we keep saying that our soils are not fertile, we need to do more. So is the price of the land, what informs that price? Is it because of the productivity that is inherent in that particular piece of land that somebody is going to hire in? Or is it because of there's a lot of speculation? And what interventions do we need to do to make sure that we are not having speculative land markets? Because actually that affects one of the critical factors of production. We need to look about labor. The cost of labor has actually been going up. Of course, the cost of labor is informed by the cost of food.
Yes.
So,
actually, I'm looking at your study here, and
yes.
the cost of labor looks to be the highest cost,
Yes.
at 36.3%.
Exactly.
Yes.
So the cost of labor actually has been going up. If you look at, we collected some data for labor, from around 2002, you'll find that the wage rate for an agricultural labor used to be like 150. Right now you're talking about 300. And it's basically because people need to buy, even the people who are farmers, at some point they'll go back to the market to buy that food. So even if you talk about mechanization, why is our cost of mechanization higher compared to the region? Yet we are using the same inputs. So today, it's much more expensive to use a tractor, for example, as in Gishu, compared to using the same input in Uganda. Yet we know that both Kenya and Uganda import tractors. So how come it's cheaper in Uganda? So those are the questions that we should be asking, so that we can actually help the farmer to bring down his cost of production, and the government just exits the market. So the government should only intervene in the market when there's a need. But it shouldn't be something that we know that every year the government will intervene. Yet we know that the strategy or the way they intervene in the market creates distortions. And the distortions, of course, creates welfare loss.
Yes.
That's why
I need to interrupt you there for a moment. We need to go on a quick break. But just before we go on a break, Emmanuel, how many times do you eat ugali yourself in a week?
I'm one of those people who eat ugali every day.
Oh.
So, and actually, this is not, it's a cultural issue that people have grown with. And one of the key aspects of the right to food is that you actually eat the food that you want to eat.
That you want to eat, yes. So we'll come back with those sentiments in a moment. But right now, we need to take a quick break. And then also, when we come back, we'll be hearing a little bit more from the Eldoret studio. But I would just like to get back to this conversation here that we're having. And we're getting a little bit of reactions from social media. Donald Kipkorir tweets, and he says uses of maize. And then he goes on to list quite a bit of things you can do with maize. One is you can make ugali, you can make porridge, you can use it to make busa, changa, beer, corn oil, ethanol fuel, chips, beer, wine. You can also use it as an oil absorbent, livestock feed, corn syrup, adhesives, fiberglass, dextrosol, and dextrins. Then at the bottom of the tweet, he says, and then you tell us to grow avocados, don't mislead us. And then there's also another reaction here from Roger Skirwa. Roger Skirwa says it is unfortunate seeing all our maize farmers wanting to supply their maize to NCPB, yet not all that maize will be bought there. Our maize farmers need to unite and form cooperatives to gain market power. I believe that our maize farmers can process their maize as other farmers from different products do. And then he also sends another tweet and says, Kenya is not food insecure because of lack of maize. It is just a creation of the mind of Kenyans that when there's no maize, then there's food insecurity. That is why we have had discussions with other like-minded people who engage farmers on orphan crops like sorghum, millet, and cassava. And in countries like Mozambique, ugali is mostly eaten by people in the north, while those in the south eat rice. Now, your quick reactions to what the farmers have said.
So I think the farmers, Mr. Kipkemboi and Chepsoi, raised a number of questions that I'd like to react to. I think the first issue that was clearly being raised is the issue of expectations. So usually farmers will look at the market signals before going into or making decisions, for example, on how much land to allocate for maize. So clearly it's like most farmers, especially in the North Rift, went into maize production this season with a price of with the last year's price, forgetting that last year's price is what was informing that. We had a huge deficit in terms of production, not just in Kenya, but in the region. And that deficit caused the prices to go that high. So the other challenge, of course, that he clearly pointed out was the issue of the way government intervenes. And the government has always intervened in a way that shows them that they will be having a certain price. So one of the ways to resolve this would be that we need to change, for example, how the government purchases maize for SFR. This year, if you look at the budget that has been announced, the much they can buy at 2,300 will be about 2.3 million bags. If the price goes higher than that, the price will fall. I mean, the quantities that can be purchased will fall. And the projected production for this year is 46 million. So what happens to the 44 million bags? And I like what the tweet that talks about looking at other marketing channels. So clearly, not all farmers get to sell to NCPB. So we should also be looking at how can we increase the marketing power to get better prices in other market channels. Then the other issue that also they raised was the issue of storage. He clearly mentioned that they are still having maize from last year in their stores. And we've already seen that, for example, even the maize that was purchased by NCPB, there are now questions about the quality of that particular maize.
Yes.
So that also brings in the issue of post-harvest losses and also management, because management also kind of raises the cost. So if the farmer is able to store for a long period, then we would expect that he can get better prices. And actually, this is where it comes back to, again, looking at what decisions or what strategy should the government be pursuing. If you look at the 46 million bags projected for this year, the 46 million is against a good short season harvest. But if you look at the rains right now, the rains seems to be failing. We don't expect such of an optimistic production for the short rain season. So that tells you that by around March, of course, we will not get 46. Probably the quantities will be much less. So that signals that the prices are likely to go up. Depending on, of course, the other question that they brought about the issue of imports.
Yes.
So how do we want to regulate our imports? Because clearly, like last year, one of the problems we are having, depressed prices this year, is because we had excessive or unregulated imports from 2017. So we still are having those stocks, and those stocks are being consumed, so such that even if we had less production, we will still have sufficient maize. So how do we want to regulate imports, and especially given that we are in a common market? We cannot say that maize from Uganda will not come to Kenya. It goes against those protocols.
You seem to disagree with one of the things that one of the farmers there said about having made a loss of 6 million shillings.
Yeah, so clear. I mean, that loss is huge. I mean, it's huge for that farmer, and the loss is actually made by the farmer says that he's producing at 27 and he expects to sell at 23, and that is if he's selling to NCPB.
Yes.
So the key question that we've been asking is that the way NCPB has been buying prices has raised a lot of governance issues. One, we know that majority of the farmers do not sell to NCPB.
Yes.
So most of people, like last year, there is now evidence that most of these guys were traders and well-connected individuals. When it comes to payment, it doesn't make sense that it takes 1 year. Even if you're getting a price of 3,000 and you get that payment 1 year later, it doesn't help you as a farmer.
Yes.
The opportunity cost is very high. So you may just look at the nominal amount that I'm getting 3,000, but if you had this capital, you would have invested it in many other things that probably would be generating more than the actual money that you're getting. So again, it comes back to the point of who is benefiting from these prices. So that kind of, if you're talking about helping farmers, I think the best strategy would be, let's intervene in the market, or in production. The challenge you have in the government is that the government intervenes in production, and the government also wants to intervene in the markets and wants to intervene in consumption. So it ends up being almost like a triple subsidy. And giving back an example of last year, farmers are subsidized because they are given subsidized inputs. Then we come and buy at a higher price, at a higher than market price. And this maize that we bought at a higher market price, when it comes to selling it, if you look at the prices NCPB was trying to dispose that maize at, they couldn't get a market, because you're actually selling at a loss, but even the price that you're selling that maize, you're not recovering even half of the money that you used. So and all this, again, remember, it's coming from the taxpayers' money. So if you are to put this money together and say, let us help the farmer produce, and don't intervene in the market, so that the farmer now can be able to compete. And he can compete with maize that is coming from Uganda, maize that is coming from Tanzania, maize coming from Zambia. But at the end of the day, if you manage to bring his cost of production to 1,000 shillings, even if he goes to the market and finds that consumers want to buy that maize at 1,200 or 1,300 shillings per bag of maize, then because you're helping him improve productivity, he'll still be making much more money. Because the other thing is that it doesn't make sense to produce at 2,700 shillings per bag and you're doing 20 bags. If you're going to do 27, exactly, you're not being effective. You should be doing 40. You know, that is the boundary of the current hybrids we have. Yes. You should be doing 30 to 40 bags.
Oh, we are getting a lot more reactions coming on social media. You can join this conversation by tweeting me at Zeynab Wandati, that's Z-E-Y-N, or also tweeting at NTV Kenya, or also respond on Facebook via the NTV Kenya Facebook page. And I tweeted out earlier asking Kenyans, would you die if you didn't eat ugali? Yes. And somebody here says that on these questions, this is Orio Kolomwangi. She says, on this question, I think we can find the elusive Luya Unity candidate. Yes, we will die. And then she says, hashtag Ugali for president. And then there's Mike, at Mike Beats. He says, there seems to be a misconception of diversification as being abandonment. Yes. Emmanuel, yes, your quick reactions to what you've, the feedback as well as what the farmers said.
One thing that I would like to dive in quickly is the responsibility of the government. Kenya is a signatory to the International Convention on Economic and Social Rights, which stipulates clearly that the government should, first of all, protect the human right to food for everyone, and then also respect in the sense of creating policies and a good environment that ensures that people are able to feed themselves with dignity. The right to food is not the right to be fed. It's the right to feed yourself with dignity. Yes. And what farmers are saying and what consumers are saying, even though I pointed out that there is a very clearly different discussion, because it seems there is a missing link between the farmers and the consumers. And the government could probably come in to regulate how much the millers are making out of this business, because then even as we have discussions of farmers forming cooperatives and adding value to their maize before selling it, so that they can also increase the cut that they get out of production, we still have the unga business being controlled by a few companies. And what we have seen in the past, even with the subsidies, the fertilizer subsidy, for example, for the government, is just benefiting a few companies. Fertilizer companies are complaining already that the government only subsidizes 20% of the fertilizer that we use in production. And yet, this fertilizer does not get to small-scale farmers. And the means in which the subsidy is organized, that you are going to get, for instance, fertilizer from the NCPB stores, does not guarantee that the fertilizer traders are also going to get their market, because they have to wait for the subsidies to end, and then before they start selling their fertilizer to farmers, and by the time they are going to do that, the farmers have already missed the season. Yes. So the discussion that we are supposed to have, first of all, is to ensure that we have a more sustainable, more resilient food system, and that the question of diversity should come in. Though it has to come in a very clear way. Again, we don't want everyone to be planting avocados. And we know even the people who are telling farmers to plant avocados are looking at the export market. And so these are challenges that we are exposing our farmers to when we jump into conclusions very fast instead of employing research and proper policy making processes. Like Tegemeo Institute has very fantastic research. FAO has very fantastic research. Why don't these people go and look at these documents and understand how can we achieve food security? How can we balance between the small-scale producers and the consumers? Because at the end of the day, if we all are championing, and this is also a challenge to the consumers, when you are here in Nairobi and you are talking about cheaper unga prices, you should be worried about what that farmer is saying in North Rift. Yes. Because at the end of the day, if the business of that farmer is not taken care of tomorrow you will not be able to
But
get
don't you
maize.
think then it is actually the farmers' fault that they're not making profit out of their maize farming? Because remember, a couple of years back, Kari did a report called the maize suitability of maize farming across the country. They went across the country testing the various soils in parts of the country to see where best you can plant maize and what kinds of fertilizer you can use. The Ministry of Agriculture tried to implement that report by cutting down the amount of DAP that is sent to parts of the country, sending other fertilizers like NPK to other parts of the country. The farmers rejected it. So how then do you help this farmer if the ministry has tried to help them and they don't want to, they don't seem to want that help?
Yeah, Zainab, I'd say it's a systematic issue. I studied agriculture myself in high school, and there's no way I was told that I can replace DAP with manure, for instance. And these are things that we know can be done. Yes. Farmers can reduce the cost of production by using resources that are available to them. And we call this agroecological farming, permaculture systems that can be put in place to ensure that, and it has to start with the government, first of all, acknowledging that it's them that push these farmers into industrial models of farming, which emphasizes on monocropping and heavy use of industrial chemicals, which is very expensive by a large extent, and is also expensive on the environment. Because also one of the challenges that farmers are not talking about in the North Rift is the ever-increasing use of fertilizer. And why are these farmers increasing the use of fertilizer? It's because of the depletion that has happened in the soils. And we have issues of soil acidity also that even prompts the government to start thinking about using NPK instead of DAP in their subsidy program. And it has happened, and farmers have rejected the NPK because they think it's not the best fertilizer to use. Because it's a systemic issue. People have been trained. The people who have gone to school, the agronomists who have gone to school have been trained that every time you put a seed on the soil, you put DAP next to it. No one wants to think about manure anymore. No one wants to think about making
people don't even
manure.
know how to make that manure
Yeah,
anymore.
so it's a discussion that we need to have, and I think one of the things that I would say from the discussion that the farmers are having, we're having now, is at least they should steer off politics in this discussion. Because what we are seeing now is a lot of, a blame game, and people are saying, oh, it's so and so, it's the cartels, it's so and so. Because at the end of the day, if we opened our borders for trade with other countries, and someone imports maize, cheap maize from wherever, and brings into our country, this person is just working towards ensuring that there's cheaper ugali in the country. Yes. So how can we make our production costs lower in the country so that we can ensure that in as much as we are protecting our farms, our small-scale farmers, we are also taking care of the interests of the consumer. And this issue of diversification should be taken seriously, because diversification not only increases productivity, because when you, for instance, if you do intercropping between maize and beans, what you're going to get is an advantage that the beans are going to fix nitrogen in the soil. These are very simple things but we shy away from talking about. If farmers, for instance, if farmers in the North Rift, the large-scale farmers who are complaining of very big losses, want to just do monocrops, and you plant very large tracts of land and you spray, so you don't want to intercrop, at the end of the day, if the price for maize is not favoring you, you have no fallback plan. So we need to encourage that, not only for the sake of profitability, but also to ensure that we have a secure future of food, in terms of ensuring that our production today does not interfere with production in the future. We need to spare our agricultural resources, we need to spare our soils and enrich as much as possible to ensure that we are reducing the cost of production, we are reducing dependency to external inputs, and we are making sure that our food quality is also increasing.
Okay, so still looking at the feedback we're getting from social media, Karl Marx, that is at Sakari1, says, honestly, if I didn't eat ugali, I would die. Now, Dr. Njagi, every month, the Food and Agriculture Organization looks at the cost of production in various food crops and how much those crops cost on the international market, those commodities. And if you look at the most recent one, which is dated October 2018, if you look at the most recent food price index for the global market, it says that the cost of maize per ton is $160.
Yeah.
If you do the math, that comes down to about 1,438 shillings and 2 cents
Yeah.
per 90 kilo bag.
Yeah.
If that is what maize costs on the international market, why is it that here on the local market it never comes close to that price? It's always higher than that.
So I think there are a number of dynamics that we must shed light on. I think, first of all, I'll start with your first earlier question that you had asked. Why is it that every farmer tries to plant maize, even in areas where
they shouldn't
be planting maize? So I think understanding that maize is a staple commodity for the country, one of the challenges we have is the markets. There's a lot of market volatility, and people cannot predict. Most of the farmers, especially the smallholder farmers, are net buyers. So even though they produce maize, they don't produce enough to last them the whole year. At some point within the season, he will actually go to the market to buy maize for his own consumption. So that kind of makes it an issue for us, because everybody then tries to grow maize because you don't trust the market. At the end of the day, you don't even trust how much. You can't predict how much you'll be buying. Even today, we can't predict how much the cost of maize will be in February. So what I'll do as a farmer, I'll try to grow that maize myself and then ensure that I have enough supply for my household. The other thing is that, coming back to the question of cost, one of the key things that we struggled is the inefficiency in terms of production. Yes, it's true that there are farmers who are growing maize that should be growing something different. But again, we must understand that farmers are rational. I believe that diversification will happen naturally. We don't need to tell farmers to diversify. And I'll give you an example. A lot of farmers in the North Rift are kind of feeling that this year was a bad year for them because they have a lot of maize, but the prices are very low. So what happens naturally is that even though they may still grow maize next season, they'll reduce the acreage.
Yes.
But that land is not left idle. They'll grow something different. So, but then the thing is, whatever else they grow is also determined by the market. So if they have, of course, right now, the crops that people are mentioning, people tend to think that there's a high market for those commodities. But remember that, for example, if you look at avocado, which has been mentioned, it's something that will take time. But
this year, Kenya seems to have done pretty well with
avocados.
Exports. Yes.
What I mean is that if you plant avocado today, it will be around 3 years. Before you get your first harvest. And by the time you're getting that harvest, the market may not be as good. So again, if you look back at what has happened in other commodities, look at coffee. Farmers divested into other things. They were never told to stop planting coffee. But it gets to a point where a farmer feels that I am not making money from this commodity, so I'm going to shift to something else. So what really attracts the change is commodities where farmers are able to access markets and participate in that market. The other challenge we have in terms of the inefficient production is the issue of marketing systems. So today, even if I have enough maize, or for example, like the farmers in the North Rift, we know that not all of them can access the NCPB market. And even if they want to sell in the open market, we have barriers, non-tariff barriers. So you have to pay cess, you have to pay a broker when you land to the market. So all these contribute to an inefficiency in the markets. And that's why we need government regulation to bring down these barriers, so that at the end of the day, we should be able to compete. We should be able to compete with the international market. So the way we can compete, of course, is to make sure that if you're saying that today the world market is offering a price of 1,000 shillings per bag, per 90 kg bag, ideally we should be producing at 800. So that a farmer can actually make a margin. But then remember, a margin of 200, if you're producing 40 bags, you're multiplying that times 40. If you're producing 10 bags, then you can actually see that a farmer is not able to. Exactly.
Right now, the rest of East Africa is producing for the Kenyan market.
Exactly.
Because it's more expensive here than
our market
is in
exactly. So even today, if the prices, for example, the NCPB, in fact, today, if you talk to most traders, they'll tell you that as they're trying to buy maize from Uganda and Tanzania, the bargaining is based on the NCPB price, which we know that it's not really a price in the market, but it's a price that it's known that, that is a price in Kenya. Yes. And that those guys are also trying to make sure that they tap into that margin. So what happens is that at the end of the day, maize becomes very expensive for the consumers, and the margins that are derived from that difference do not necessarily go to the farmer. So the key thing that we should be making is that, one, we need to seriously improve our productivity. If you look at the last trends for the last like 5 years, our productivity has been constant. And even like this year, when you have a good harvest, we are not mainly attributing it to good weather. We are not saying that farmers used more fertilizer, and as a result we got. So we're just saying that, it was a good year. We had a lot of rainfall. We had minimal pest and disease outbreaks. That's why we have a good production.
More feedback is still coming in. At Wanjala, Dr. Hu says the first thing that we need to do is to understand the macroeconomics of what a staple food is. I'd just like, as we wind up, we are running out of time. I'd like to hear from you, Emmanuel. What do you think what is your definition of a staple food?
One thing, staple food would vary with different communities. Like people would assume that maize is widely used in Kenya. I've gone to areas like in Ukambani, for example, and I will tell you, if you go there, green grams are served in every meal, and that is their staple, because one, they have the efficiency to produce that food, and then two, they like the food and they believe in that food, because you have to, you have a relationship with the food that you eat. You don't eat something because someone is selling it. You eat food that you relate with. So there's that connection with the food, and then also there's the ease of preparation, and also availability of that food, and that availability should also be looked at in a longer view. So in the long term, availability of that food. So that is what constitutes a food that people would want to associate with and make it part of their culture, because then it's easy for them to access it, and it's easy for them to maintain consumption of that particular food.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for making time to join us today. And this is a very interesting discussion that we could go on and on all day, especially considering how emotive maize is and how political it has